Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for your great testimony. One of the issues we all seem to focus on is the flood mapping, which I'd like to probe a bit further. And I want to thank Mr. Colton for mentioning the Technical Mapping Advisory Council and the National Mapping Program. I think that was I helped contribute to that along with many of my colleagues here in terms of the 2008 legislation, and I think it would be very useful if we could move that. But Mr. Berginnis, let me, as I understand it, that there's a choice of doing the detailed study or the approximate study. And as GAO has pointed out, the detailed study, as the name implies, is much more accurate, much more effective, and uses more reliable data. So from your perspective, and who determines the type of study which should be undertaken to update a map?
That study need is first determined at the state and local level. What happens in a mapping process is that FEMA first solicits from states and communities where those mapping needs are, for example, there could be a unincorporated little neighborhood area in a rural community that there's an acute need right there to have detailed mapping, but maybe on the rest of the water course there isn't. Then based on all of those mapping needs being evaluated at one time, the reality is there is a mapping budget that has to be met, and I've not heard a situation yet where a mapping budget has been adequate enough to cover those.
And just
Sure.
The mapping budget is the local budget or the FEMA budget?
It would be the FEMA budget on a per-study basis in doing it. And so from there, then priorities are made. That do take into account state and local priorities, but also FEMA, I know, has some formulas in terms of designating mapping budgets that includes risk, the overall community risk and watershed risk, and doing those kinds of things.
But it seems to me that there's because, as I understand it, they're using approximate data is a lot cheaper than using a detailed study, and there's budget pressures, so that we've built in a disincentive to do some of the most specific, detailed, more accurate mapping. Is that?
I'm not sure it's as much of a disincentive as it is just a recognition of the realities of the mapping budgets. Again, the disparity between the need and the amount of money available is significant.
Right, but but let me just pursue this one more, and that is. By and large, can you comment on generally FEMA is using, I would guess, approximations if you look at their activities rather than detailed mapping? Is that your impression, or is that?
I think they're using a combination of both. The one thing I do want to mention about approximations that are interesting, I remember when I first started as a state official working with the flood maps in the early 1990s. The approximate maps were literally dots on a map. I mean, they were, and when I heard stories about how they were created, it really wasn't terribly technically sound. Today's approximate mapping, most of the mapping, if not all of it, actually has engineering models behind it now. So there are efficiencies even in the approximate mapping that make it better as a product than before.
I know Mr. Riedberg wants to make a comment, but just a final point is that the new maps, how effectively are they incorporating all the different data sources that have come online? Storm surge, coastal inundation, information from the Corps of Engineers, NOAA information. Is that being effectively factored into these maps, or is that sort of still outside and not being used?
Well, the process is good where it allows consideration of all of those things, but actually incorporating all of those data into the maps is something that is not being done nearly as much as it should. And again, I think it goes back to budget and the cost of doing it.
But from your perspective,
Sure.
Incorporating that data would be helpful, useful, and provide more accurate.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And then in my final few moments, Mr. Rittenberg, you had a comment. I don't want to cut you off.
Thank you, Senator Reid. I know my place. I'm glad to wait.
No, please.
One of the things that strikes me is that there's a lot of locally generated information which is not being used in deriving FEMA maps, and some of it is very good and some of it isn't, but you could have criteria to examine it. I know that when I did a development, I had to do my engineer's stormwater. It had to be checked by the city. It had to be checked by the county. We even hired an engineer. We paid the neighbor engineer to review it, and this information is not included in the FEMA maps, and as if those stormwater areas are not there. So some areas are good, some aren't, but there's a potential savings for the federal government to get better maps quicker by utilizing local information that meets a certain standard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.